Hello, my name is Kelsey Jarnigan. These are my audience members. Did you know when fairy tales were first presented and read for crowds, they were actually meant for adult entertainment and not for children? When they were performed in front of this live audience, they were very sexual and gruesome. Jakob and Wilhelm Grimm's were the collectors of these oral fairy tales, which they collected from peasants and high-class citizens, and put them in a book of nursery and household tales. But when they collected them, they did not leave them to their original state. They in fact changed them and added females as one of the main antagonists, used cannibalism, and had cruel and unusual punishment. These fairy tales include so much gruesome and harsh aspects of these that it's hard to believe that these are in a so-called children's book. There's 3 aspects to the antagonist, such as beasts and robbers, but this is all coming from Maria Tatar, a professor from Princeton, her book, The Hard Facts About the Grimm's Fairy Tales. The one that stuck out the most was composed of women, such as witches, cooks, stepmothers, and mother-in-laws. And thanks to Wilhelm Grimm's, he is the reason stepmothers is one of the main antagonists of these stories. In classic tales, such as The Six Swans, the stepmother is the main antagonist as she goes after her 6 stepsons and turns them into swans. Or even Snow White, in which her jealous stepmother just gets so angry with her, she sends a huntsman after her to kill her and then receive her lungs and liver. These are all very common for these tales to use the stepmother as the antagonist. But the use of witches is also very common. These witches are very cannibalistic and has higher power over the hero in the story. Such as in Hansel and Gretel, these kids are in a famine in which their family can no longer provide for them, and so the mother decides to abandon them in the forest. In this forest, they meet a cannibalistic witch. In Jack Zipes' book, The Rationalization of Abandonment and Abuse, he mentions how Wilhelm kind of suggested that the stepmother and the witch were connected, leading to demonizing women in this tale. Also in Hansel and Gretel, the witch decides to fatten up Hansel to eat him, which is very common with the females in these stories, as they crave the children's flesh. In The Juniper Tree, one of the most gruesome stories in the Grimms, the stepmother loathes her stepson, so much so that the demon got to her and she chopped off his head and then blamed her daughter on it. But that's not even the worst part. She continued to chop up his body and serve it to his father, and he ate him right up. And this is very common to have the stepmother have such a cruel and unusual punishment towards these children. Carrying on to other stories that use cruel and unusual punishment, especially towards female characters. They typically strip them naked and then torture them to death, especially in Goose Girl, where the main antagonist is a servant who portrays the princess and pretends to live that princess life, and when it's found out, she is stripped naked, thrown in a barrel of nails, and then dragged by a horse and killed to death. These deaths are very explicit and is very shown in most of these tales. And sometimes this torture is not just from just random side characters, it can be from the so-called hero. Such as from Hans my Hedgehog, he gets one of the princesses to strip naked and then he flings his spurs at her just to make her ugly. And that description just makes it such a hard read and always makes people very uncomfortable. In Maria Tatar, she talks about in chapter 1 of The Hard Facts of the Grimm's Fairy Tales that Wilhelm Grimm's actually intensifies and adds more violent episodes to these stories. These stories are no longer the Disney-fied versions that we knew and loved growing up. They demonize women anytime they're in any of these stories, and even making them their own category of antagonists out of the 3 antagonist groups. And their cannibalistic features as witches, and then evil stepmothers, craving the flesh of their human children is horrible. And then last but not least, the worst of all, the torture of cruel and unusual punishment towards the female antagonist is very disgusting, as they use a lot of nudity and very vocal on it. So unfortunately, those were the past tales, but we now have the Disney-fied versions. But people should never forget the demonizing of women in these original folklore. Thank you. I'm Kelsey Jarnigan. And once again, this is my audience. Thank you guys so much.